H. Holmes, Jack the Ripper, Elizabeth Bathory. These are some of the more infamous serial killers of early recorded history. Records of these monsters go as far back as 331 BC, with a poisoning ring consisting of at least 170 ancient Roman women that tricked unsuspecting men into drinking concoctions claimed to be medicinal. This was proven to be true when two patrician women, who were of the highest class in Roman society, were arrested and chose to take the concoction to prove their innocence. They died immediately, proving that the concoction was the cause of more than 90 deaths across the Roman Republic. Like this, there are several serial killer cases all over the world that are so fascinating yet have not been covered much in the modern age. For this particular video, I'm going to cover 3 of the earliest recorded cases in Spain. The first case is Spain's first recorded serial killer, Manuel Blanco Romo Santa. Romo Santa was born as one of 5 children to Miguel Blanco and Maria Romo Santa on November 18, 1809, in the village of Ruggiero, Escos, in the province of Orense. What is arguably one of the reasons he became the deranged psychopath he is now known as is that he was initially believed to be a female and was raised as such until the age of 6. He was initially born Manuela Blanco Romo Santa, with his sex reassigned by a doctor at the age of 6 and his name changed legally by the age of 8. It is believed that because he was able to read and write, his family was wealthy due to the skills being rare at the time in which he lived. Romo Santa has also been described in multiple accounts to be what is legally considered a little person, standing between 4'6" and 4'11", with blonde hair and was, quote-unquote, tender-looking. He was initially employed as a dressmaker and was married once to a woman who passed away of suspicious causes in 1833. Though the circumstances around her death were suspicious, Romo Santa was never investigated or suspected of being involved in her death. After the death of his wife, he became a traveling salesman in Escos that eventually traveled throughout Galicia and Portugal. He was most certainly a smart man, acting as a guide for travelers crossing the mountains in Castile, Asturias, and Cantabria as a means to get more trade opportunities. His first count of murder was that of Vincente Fernandez in 1844. Fernandez was an alguacil of León, meaning that he was a government official, and confronted Romo Santa in order to collect a debt of 600 real that was owed to a supplier in Ponferrada. Romo Santa failed to appear at his court appearance to hear the charge against him and was, by default, sentenced to 10 years in prison. To avoid this sentence, he went into hiding for a year in an abandoned shelter in Ermida before re-emerging as Antonio Gomez, a native of Nogueira, Portugal, with a fake passport. For at least a year, he lived in the small village of Robertecao in the district of Villar de Barrio, helping with the harvest as well as working as a cook, coin maker, and a weaver of yarn using a spinning wheel. His already effeminate disposition became more so because of his ability to become friendly with the women of the village, so much so that they would hire him as a guide. Romo Santa fell under suspicion when his clients started to disappear, delivering letters to their loved ones to convince them that the client was safely settling down at their destination. The villagers caught on when it was discovered he was selling the victims' clothing locally, beginning rumors that he was selling soap made from their human fat as well. This rumor turned into a complaint to the city of Escalona in 1852, alleging that he was tricking women and children into hiring him as a guide so he could murder them for their fat, which would be made into soap and sold. He was arrested in Nombela, in the province of Toledo, in September that same year and tried in Alariz, in the area of Ourense. The defense Romo Santa gave to his crimes was so wild that it became the subject of a historical judgment that has never been repeated since. Cause number 1776, The Wolfman, volume 36 of the courts of Allariz. Because Galicia was in the middle of one of the worst famines in their history that lasted throughout the 19th century, causing mass migrations and serious increase in insanity, his defense was almost believable. For his defense, he took advantage of this by claiming that he was cursed with lycanthropy and committed the murders while in his woven form. This is his account of his quote-unquote affliction and how it occurred. The first time I transformed was in the mountains of Chouso. I came across two ferocious-looking wolves. I suddenly fell to the ground and began to feel convulsions. I rolled over 3 times, and a few seconds later, I was a wolf. I was out marauding with the other 2 for 5 days until I returned to my own body, the one you see before you today, Your Honor. The other 2 wolves came with me, who I thought were also wolves, changed into human form. They were from Valencia. One was called Antonio, and the other Don Genaro. They too were cursed. We attacked and ate a number of people because we were hungry. After being asked to demonstrate his transformation in court by prosecutor Luciano Bastida Arneas, Romo Santa claimed that his curse was only for 13 years and that the time had expired the previous week. Ayari's doctors evaluated his condition, and their October 1852 report, based heavily on phrenology, refuted the claim of his affliction as being invented, even though it was noted that lycanthropy can be determined from a visceral examination and cranioscopia. Arneas said the following regarding the report. His inclination to vice is voluntary and not forced. The subject is not insane, dim-witted, or monomaniacal, nor were these conditions achieved while incarcerated. On the contrary, he instead turns out to be perverted, an accomplished criminal capable of anything, cool and collected and without goodness, but acts with free will, freedom, and knowledge. Though Romo Santa confessed to 13 murders in total, 4 of them were ruled as real wolf attacks due to indications from forensic evidence, with a guilty verdict of the remaining 9 due to indications of human butchery on the corpses. These are the victims to which he was found guilty of murder. Manuela Garcia, 47, and her daughter Petra, 15, who were killed in Sierra de San Mamede while traveling to Santander. Benita Garcia Blanco, 34, and her son Francisco, 10, who were killed in Cogro de Boy while traveling to Rua Cantabras. Antonia Ian, 37, and her daughter Peregrina, who were killed while traveling to Orense. Josefa Garcia, age unknown, and her son Jose Pazos, 21, were murdered in an unknown location. Maria Dolores, 12, who was also murdered in an unknown location. Romo Santa was sentenced to death by garrote, with 1,000 real compensation to be paid out for each victim on April 6, 1854. The case lasted 7 months, with a transcript of over 2,000 pages that was later turned into 5 volumes titled Lycanthropia. After it was sent for ratification and 7 months' consideration by the territorial court in Coruna, his sentence was reduced to life in prison. An appeal in March 1854 resulted in the original verdict being upheld and his death sentence being reinstated. Arneas went on to become a famous prosecutor turned Knight of the Royal and Distinguished Order of Charles III of Spain, as well as appointed to the Supreme Court. A Mr. Phillips, who was believed to be the exiled French physician Joseph Pierre Durand de Gros, sent a letter to the Spanish Minister of Justice, José de Castro y Orozco, stating that Romo Santa was suffering from lycanthropy and was therefore not responsible for his actions. Mr. Phillips stated that he was a hypnotist that had treated lycanthropy through hypnosis and requested a stay of execution so that he could study the case. Romo Santa's sentence was again commuted to life in prison by royal order from Queen Isabella II on May 13, 1854, after receiving a letter regarding the case from Orozco. He was then transferred to a prison in Chelanovela for study. It is believed, due to 2 newspaper articles in December 1863, that he died of stomach cancer on December 14, 1863. These articles stated the following. In Ceuta prison, the unfortunately famous Manuel Blanco Romo Santa, known in all Spain as the werewolf as a consequence of his atrocities and misdeeds, and who was sentenced to prison by the court in La Coruña, died in that place on 14th of this month, being the victim of stomach cancer. On October 17, 1821, our second case study was born to farmers Nicolas de Garrayo and Noberta Ruiz de Argondona in the small village near the town of Sabatellera in Alava, Basque Country, Spain, called Igualaz. Juan Diaz de Garrayo y Ruiz de Argondona, known as the Sacramentecas or fat extractor, was the 9th child in his family and extremely illiterate due to never receiving a proper education. Garrayo was sent to serve as a farmhand, shepherd, and coal miner in the neighboring towns of Salvatierra, Alaiza, Ocariz, Izarza, Anua, and Alegria de Lenzi when he was 14 during the First Carlist War. He was hired directly as a farming and field manager for a widow in Vitoria named Beros de Guieta in 1850, going on to marrying her and inheriting the name Zurumbon, which came from her first husband. La Zurumbona died in 1863, 3 of their 5 children surviving her, and Garrayo moved on to marry his second wife, Juana Salazar, soon after. Though he had been happy in his first marriage, he found himself in constant conflict with Salazar and her stepchildren, resulting in the alienation of his own children. His eldest son left the family to work for a more affluent family, while the other 2 children used any excuse to spend time in the street away from them. Though Salazar died of smallpox in 1870 and Garrayo was able to remarry, his third marriage was even worse than the second. His third wife was a belligerent alcoholic, which is alleged to be one of the reasons he began his first killing spree. A well-known woman turned prostitute from Vitoria was his first victim after he paid her for her services on April 2nd, 1870. Garrayo took her to the Recachicui stream off of the road to Navarre for sexual intercourse, getting into a confrontation over how much her fee was before he threw her to the ground and choked her into unconsciousness. Once she was immobilized, he threw her into the stream and drowned her before stripping her nude and leaving her face up on the ground. He finally covered the body with the clothes he'd taken off of her and returned to the city after sitting next to her naked corpse for a short while, where a servant would find her the next morning while picking flowers. Though the authorities were alerted and the body was recovered, there wasn't enough evidence to go off of and the case was archived. On March 12, 1871, Garrayo ran across his second victim in the Puerta de Real, a poor widow begging for money and food since she hadn't eaten that day. He gave her a real and told her to meet him at the road to Navarre for a sexual encounter and made her promise not to be late. They walked a good distance down the road to Libizacara near Ricacuichi and engaged in sexual intercourse, the interaction becoming violent after the woman was unhappy with the payment he offered. Garrayo then strangled her with his bare hands, leaving her body to be found once again the next day without any evidence tying the murder to him. His third murder took place August 21st, 1872, when he kidnapped a 13-year-old servant girl during his travels to Gamara Mayor. He strangled her to unconsciousness, raped her, and strangled her once again until she was dead. Her body was left in a ditch outside of Vitoria to once again be found by investigators with no substantive evidence to quell the uproar that came from residents of that nearby city. Garrayo killed once again near Vitoria after he solicited the services of a 23-year-old woman not far from his home. He took her to the road to La Rioja, past the Portal de Barreras, to ensure that they were not seen together. They met again for sexual intercourse next to the bridge, an altercation occurring once again when he offered her too low a sum for her services. He strangled her with his bare hands, as he had done with 3 previous victims, but this time believed she was not dead when her body moved slightly. To ensure she was dead, he took a hairpin from the woman's hair, straightened it, and sat with his knees on top of her, stabbing her in the heart. Her body was left near the river, and the uproar of Vitorian villagers increased. Police unable to find any solid leads, even when a soldier tasked to serve in the Third Carlist War was their prime suspect at one point. Garrayo attempted to take a 5th victim in August 1873, another prostitute, but was forced to flee when she screamed for nearby guards from the Polvorin Viejo prison. His next attempt was an old and sick beggar woman he found on the road to La Zamacuera in June 1874. Though he immediately tried to strangle her with his bare hands, as was his ritual, she fought him off until 2 other women arrived. He fled the scene with the beggar woman identifying him and stating he was drunkenly trying to kill her for no reason, but the attack was never reported. Garrayo stopped his murdering spree for the next 4 years, though it is posed that some murders during this time were committed by imitators. In 1876, his third wife became deathly ill and bedridden, staying with her though doctors stated there was nothing they could do for her. He married his fourth and last wife, an old widow named Juana Ibasate, a month after the death of his previous wife. Garrayo was held in suspicion of his 3 dead wives, but no evidence materialized to solidify it, with the following quote being said regarding his third wife. "No, I did not kill her, because if I had, I would have declared it, as I have done with others." The first alleged imitator committed a much more gruesome crime January 2nd, 1878, when a 55-year-old woman was returning home from buying wine in Arecha Veleta. Her right hand was severed, she was disemboweled, and multiple stab wounds were inflicted upon her chest and stomach. The second imitated murder was committed the next month on February 28th when an 11-year-old girl living in Vitoria was seized, raped, and had her belly slashed open with a razor in her home. It is reported that the murderer, who was identified prior to the girl's death on March 3rd, was a 75-year-old man who had knocked on the door of her residence. Not only did she identify him 3 times before her death, but he had left behind the murder weapon and admitted the razor was his. Though he denied any involvement in the crime, he was convicted and initially sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, with the sentence being changed to death by garroting by the Supreme Court of Spain, which was carried out in Vitoria on May 19, 1880. The final suspected copycat crime occurred around the same time as the previous in the countryside around Vitoria, the main suspect being a shepherd seen in the city beforehand but was never apprehended. Garrayo returned to his killing spree with another failed attempt on November 1st, 1878, with a woman cooking alone in a mill outside of Vitoria. Because of his age, the woman overpowered him during his attempt to strangle her, forcing him to flee as he had with the previous 2 failed attempts 4 years prior. This attempt ultimately got him arrested for 2 months when the woman identified him to law enforcement. Almost a year later, whilst traveling from Vitoria to Castile, between the villages of Gomecha and Arenez, he approached a beggar woman with the offer of money. He then pushed her off of the road and, though she hit her head on a rock, failed to murder her when she kicked him off and ran back to Vitoria screaming as loud as she could. He ran after her and, with the help of his wife, was able to pay for her silence and keep him out of jail in the form of 80 reales. Before his safety was ensured, he hid as a miner in the Somorrostro mines in Biscay until September of that year. He met a maid from Zatequi, 25-year-old Maria Dolores Corzar, September 7th on his way back to Vitoria. He talked to her until he was sure nobody was around. For instance, they were seen together by a mail service employee and dragged her off the road. With her own handkerchief around her neck, he asked her for sexual intercourse in exchange for money and her silence about the encounter, getting only resistance in response. When she would not stop resisting his advances, he stabbed her in the chest with a razor before raping her and stabbing her in the belly until she was dead. He hid her body in the food basket she'd been carrying and decided to take a detour through the mountains to a road inn called Venta del Grillo for alcohol, choosing to sleep under the bridge that night on the Zendora River. After breakfast at an inn in Arriaga, he returned to the bridge he slept at the previous night and climbed the hill of Araca to find 52-year-old Manuela Garcia, a farmer woman from Navarrete. The two spoke for a while, Garrayo learning that she had been in Vitoria for the festival and was on her way home with some food she had bought. He claimed he was looking for a lost mare, but confessed he planned on raping and murdering her when they moved underneath a tree to get out of incoming rain. When she attempted to run, he grabbed her and strangled her with her apron, stripping her nude for a fruitless attempt to rape her since he couldn't get himself aroused enough to perform. To ensure she was actually dead, he stabbed her in the heart and stomach with the same razor he had used on Cortazar, disemboweling her and cleaning his hands off on her clothing. After the body was covered, he ate the food she had bought and went back to the bridge to sleep once more. He disposed of the razor in the river, cleaned himself up, and returned to Vitoria only to change clothes before leaving immediately for Alegria. The bodies were found the same day he returned and left Vitoria, the investigation into the murders being headed by Judge Jose Antonio de Parada, government official Pio Fernandez de Pineda, and a Guardia Civil commander in Mugruya. Garrayo was linked to Cortazar through the mail carrier that had seen them together, and once again was linked to her through the testimony of inn patrons and farmers of the region, one of these being a farmer who had seen him in the mountains after Cortazar's murder. The description given was linked to his recent arrest for the attack on the miller and the beggar woman, finally lodging a complaint to the law enforcement after the attack in August. Pinedo got an arrest warrant for Garrayo's home and found through his wife that he had left after the reported incident in August and she hadn't seen him since, which was a lie since he returned to change clothing September 9th. Garrayo's description had spread to the home of a farmer he served in Alegria, the farmer's daughter telling her father that the new servant was quote-unquote so ugly he quote-unquote looked like the Sacamantecas. He was immediately arrested September 21st when he returned to Vitoria unexpectedly, Pinedo having recognized him on the street. Though Pinedo interrogated him and kept him in jail for 12 days, he denied any involvement in the crimes he was accused of. He finally cracked when Warden Jose Fresco and keyholder Juan Jimenez appealed to his religious beliefs, convincing him that his confession to the crimes were his only way to obtain forgiveness from God in the form of divine mercy. Jimenez documented the murder of the Zetgui woman, with the murder of the Araca woman being added with Fresco's involvement in the interrogation. From 9 p.m. on October 3rd to 3 a.m. on October 4th, Garay repeated his testimony before a judge and notaries with further detail, including 4 other murders and 4 attempted murders. Parada passed down 2 death penalty sentences and economic compensation for the last 2 murders, Garayo calmly listening and asking his lawyers to sign in his stead due to his illiteracy. He was given stew after requesting it and confined with shackles on his feet, with the only way of shaving being with a match, which just made the beard return thicker afterwards. He learned to read through the jail's library and had his lawyers appeal his conviction to the Audiencia of Burgos with the claim of insanity. The court of Vitoria was ordered to interrogate all of his friends and relatives, along with having multitudes of doctors evaluate him, 11 of which finding Garayo to be sane at the time of his crimes. He was re-evaluated by doctors of the mental hospitals in Carabanchel Alto and Toledo at the behest of his defense, being deemed an imbecile and under the influence of quote-unquote partial madness or quote-unquote intermittent monomania amidst long intervals of lucidity during his crimes. The Supreme Court denied the appeal, and he was inevitably garroted at the Polvorian Viejo prison by executioner Lorenzo Huertas, May 11, 1881, with his corpse being publicly exposed for 10 hours afterwards before being buried in an unmarked grave in the Santa Isabel Cemetery. It is rumored that his head was separated and sold to a medical collection in Madrid, along with the already known rumor associated with his misguided given nickname, Sacamantecas. It is rumored that the disemboweling of his last victim was a way to promote this rumor, though there is no evidence that he ever extracted or sold the fat of his victims. Our final case is that of a woman called by many names: the vampire of Querer Ponent, the vampire of Barcelona, the vampire of the Raval. Our final case is that of the Spanish child serial killer and procuress, kidnapper and prostitute, Enriqueta Martí y Riolles. Born in Sant Feliu de Llobregat in 1868, Martí worked as a maidservant and nanny until she moved from her hometown in Barcelona to become a prostitute in a high-class brothel. She entered into a failed marriage with a painter by the name of Juan Pujalo, a marriage she alleges to have ended due to her infidelity, unpredictable character, and continuous visits to houses with bad reputations. Though they broke up and got back together 6 times, their relationship was officially over in 1912. Martí began to create her vile reputation when she opened her own brothel in 1909, deciding to accommodate the depraved desires affluent customers from Barcelona had for a premium. These desires included the sexual exploitation of children. She would go to great lengths to kidnap children for her own financial gain, dressing as a pauper by day in the poor parts of the city, begging and joining food lines at monasteries. By night, she would frequent wealthy places such as El Liceo and the Casino del Arrabasada in order to acquire more customers for the children she kidnapped and prostituted. Her depraved uses of children ran deeper than just financially, being known for using children in order to practice witchcraft. She would create concoctions from the 5 to 15-year-old children she kidnapped and exploited using their fat, blood, hair, and bones. She sold creams and elixirs made from their remains for supposed anti-aging purposes and sold their blood as a cure for tuberculosis and other incurable diseases, which the wealthy happily paid for. During the tragic week in 1909, a week in which violent confrontations between the Spanish army and anarchists broke out en masse, Martí was arrested with a young man from a wealthy family at her flat in Barcelona's Carrer Minerva for the sexual exploitation of children at her brothel. Because her wealthy benefactors ensured that she wasn't tried for these accusations, she was able to continue kidnapping, prostituting, and murdering poor children for another 3 years. By the time she was arrested in 1912, it is speculated that she had kidnapped innumerable children over the span of 20 years. Her final victim, Teresita Guitart Congost, was reportedly kidnapped February 10, 1912, kickstarting a public riot in response to authorities' half-assed searches for her and the missing children over the years. Rumors of Martí's involvement started when her neighbor, Claudia Elias, started telling villagers about the suspicious activity going on at Martí's home. She stated that she saw a girl with cropped hair looking through a window from the first-floor flat at number 29 Carrer Ponent on February 17th and was completely shut out when asking Martí if the girl was hers. Her suspicions went from a municipal agent named Jose Assens to the chief of the Riba Brigade and finally were confirmed when there was a noise complaint about chickens in Martí's flat. Martí was found in the court of Calle de Felandina and escorted back to her flat when she was informed of the accusations against her, to which she had no objection and seemed surprised. 2 girls were found in the flat, Congost and a girl named Angelita, who were immediately taken from Martí's possession. The stories both girls told of what occurred upon and after their capture were harrowing, to say the least. Angelita was taken before Congost, recounting that there was a 5-year-old boy named Pepito there before her. She stated that she witnessed Martí murder Pepito on the kitchen table, an event that traumatized her. Congost stated that she was captured with a black rag over her head after being promised candies, Martí cutting her hair and instructing the girl to call her Mama. Both girls attested that they were fed potatoes and stale bread, pinched as a way to punish them, and were left unattended more often than not, even though they were told not to go to the windows and balconies along with several rooms in the flat. One day, they took the risk and decided to explore the forbidden rooms, finding a sack filled with girls' clothing and a boning knife that were drenched in blood. Though they did take this risk, neither left the flat during their captivity. Congost was returned to her parents, but Angelita was unable to be completely identified since she didn't know her surname, and the only thing she knew of her parents was her confirmation of Martí's claim that her father's name was Juan. The claim was that Angelita was the daughter of Martí and her husband, though he stated before a judge that he had not lived with her for years, they never had children, and had no clue who Angelita was or where she came from. Angelita was ultimately found to be a newborn kidnapped from her sister-in-law, whom she was told was stillborn. The second inspection of the flat bore an astounding amount of evidence, all of which painted a very dark picture. The knife and sack of bloody clothing that the 2 girls had found were discovered along with another sack containing dirty clothing and at least 30 small bones that showed signs of being burned. Compared to the generally foul-smelling flat, the lounge was immaculately decorated and contained the following: 50 pitchers, jars, and wash bowls containing greasy lard, coagulated blood, children's hair, powdered bones, and skeletal hands, along with an assortment of potions, ointments, and salves prepared for sale. What was found prompted the search of Martí's other known residences, a flat in Carrer Picalques, a 3rd flat in Carrer Tires, and a small house in Carrer Jocs Florals in Sants. False walls containing human remains were found in both flats, with additional remains found in the garden of the small house. The remains found in the garden consisted of a 3-year-old skull and various bones of children ages 3, 6, and 8. With some that still had pieces of clothing in a condition confirming Martí's victim of choice being poor children from families that couldn't afford to search for them. Investigators also went to the property of Martí's family in Sant Feliu de Llobregat, finding the jarred remains of children and a book of remedies made using them. Further investigation of the flat in 29 Carrer Ponent found further evidence of strange and depraved practices. It was discovered that Martí extensively documented interactions with their clients in a book of notes with handwritten receipts, packages of letters written in a coded language, and a list of names of affluent families and important figures in Barcelona. It was also solidified that she was very devoted to the quote-unquote cult she built around the practice of witchcraft. There was an ancient book with parchment covers, along with elegantly calligraphed written recipes and labeled potions. The list of client names became an extremely controversial topic of conversation because of their status and the terribly low likelihood that any would be held accountable for their crimes. The list was so scandalous that law enforcement convinced the public that the list contained people who were tricked into dealings with Martí just to avoid more rioting after Tragic Week. Martí was imprisoned at Reina Malia jail while awaiting her trial, attempting to commit suicide on multiple occasions. She was interrogated thoroughly about the mountain of evidence found at the properties she owned. When questioned about Teresita Guitart being in her home, Martí claimed that she found her the day before in the Ronda de Sant Pau alone and starving. Claudia Elise claimed this to be false, stating that she'd seen the girl in the flat several days before Martí's arrest. When asked about the body parts and whether or not bones found were burned or cooked, Martí initially claimed to study the human anatomy until the pressure was too much for her to take. She confessed to being an expert healer that used children as raw ingredients and the remedies she sold, saying they were the best and highly sought after by the wealthier class. She admitted to the services she was known for as a procurer for pedophiles, but refused to name any customers that solicited said services. She claimed that Pepito was entrusted to her by a family who couldn't care for him, stating that he had gone out into the countryside after he became ill and never returned. She couldn't deny or refute any of the evidence found at her properties, or that some of the remains might be Pepito's, unable to identify the family that supposedly entrusted him to her and confirming he was indeed kidnapped. She was recognized as the person who had kidnapped the infant son of an Aragonese woman 6 years earlier, the woman stating that Martí had been kind to her after a long journey from her home and disappeared with the boy after she was allowed to hold him. She also confessed to prostituting a 17-year-old girl in a brothel she owned and performing abortions, but she never confessed to a single murder she was accused of. After attempting to slit her wrists with a wooden knife, the public was very adamant that she should be put under tighter supervision to ensure she would face a judge and die by the garrote. Unfortunately for them, Martí was lynched on a prison patio by other prisoners 15 months after her arrest on May 12, 1913. Theories surround her death, such as the prisoners were paid off by Martí's wealthy clients to keep their secrets and avoid a public trial. She was secretly buried in a common grave on the mountain of Montjuic in Barcelona at the Cementerio del Sudoeste, but it is still hotly debated if the crimes she is accused of are actually true.